Good evening, and welcome back to Mo's channel. Today is February the 23rd, 2019. In the last video, I spoke about the fundamentals of economics, economic philosophy, economic thought, economic theory, whatever the fuck you want to call it. In this video, I now want to propose a new economic model for nations. In proposing this economic model, I will use the United States of America as a basis, and we are going to establish several constraints and several requirements for this economic model. First of all, we are going to define a national economy as that ecosystem in which goods and services are produced and exchanged for the purpose of benefiting the citizens of that nation. The only reason a nation should exist is for the benefit, for the furtherance of the welfare of the citizens of that nation. If a nation does not serve to advance the livelihood and prosperity of its citizens, then that nation should not exist. Because the people that live within that geographic boundary called that nation would be better off if they did not have this notion of nationhood. It serves them no purpose. Hence, these are the constraints. Number one, personal incomes shall not be taxed. Number two, corporate revenue shall be taxed. Number three, there will be no central bank to intervene in the markets and set interest rates. The interest rates shall be set by the market. I will address that forthcoming. Number four, the nation exists for the benefit of the citizens, not special interests, not corporate interests, not foreign interests. The nation exists for the benefit of the citizens. Now, let's understand where current economic theory, where current national economies come from. In medieval Europe, you had your kings, your queens, whatever the fuck, and the king or the queen owned the nation. That was his property. If I'm the king of France, I own France. Everything that is produced in France is my property. As a citizen of France, you thrive, you exist at my pleasure. I am the king, I own this land. In medieval Europe, you had what you called feudalism. Under a feudal state, I'm the king. I have my wealthy landowners, the land barons, the lords, the knights, the sirs. That's what a knight is. That's what a lord is. When you talk about the House of Lords in Britain, those were the landowners, the barons. Their heredity goes back hundreds, if not thousands of years. Now, a land baron owned land, and on that land, he had serfs who worked for him. peasants. When it came time for war, that land baron would go amongst his serfs and raise up an army and present that army to the king. And hence, that army would go to war, or that knight's army would go to war on behalf of the king. So, when you moved into industrialization, away from agrarianism to industrialization, nothing changed because the land barons now became the corporate owners. The serfs now became the corporate workers. So everything has been designed for the benefit of those at the top, who, in the case of America, are the owners of the corporations, whether they be small business owners, whether they be shareholders. This is who owns America. This is who America is founded for, and this is for whom America functions. The problem with that is that economies, national economies, are not structured to be profit-producing entities. If you look at most democratic societies, specifically in the Western world, what happens? You have a government, it collects taxes from its citizens, and that is its source of revenue. It then spends money on a variety of things. But the government never has enough money to spend. So the government borrows money. When the government borrows money, it has to pay interest on that money. So we want to move away from that stupidity of indebted governments. And we now want to look at how to structure a national economy that is profitable. And those profits pass on to the shareholders. The shareholders of this national economy are the citizens of that nation. In the US, the shareholders are American citizens. In Canada, the shareholders are Canadian citizens. In Kenya, the shareholders are Kenyan citizens. How do we do that? The first thing you have to do is change the government from being a cost center to being a profit center. In accounting, you have two major branches of accounting. You have financial accounting, you have cost or managerial accounting. Financial accounting is focused on generating financial statements that could be presented to shareholders, to banks, and to others who might have an interest in the financial stability of that corporation. Managerial accounting is focused on providing information to internal management that enables them to make the best financial decisions. Within the realm of managerial accounting, we come across two terms, cost center and profit center. A cost center is that ecosystem within a corporation that generates profit or revenue. No, that's a profit center. A profit center generates revenue or profit. The operations of a corporation, a plant if you're manufacturing, a warehouse if you're distributing. I guess you could say the law practice if you're a law firm, the medical practice if you're a hospital. That generates the product. hence it generates revenue. Marketing, sales, they sell the product, hence they generate revenue. Finance does not sell the product, so finance is a cost center. IT does not generate a product, hence IT is a cost center. Human resources does not generate a product, hence HR is a cost center. You can transform a cost center into a profit center. The easiest way to do that is to implement what they call chargebacks. What are chargebacks? If I'm a finance department, let's just say I'm the IT department, and I provide databases or data storage capabilities to the profit centers. Those data storage capabilities enable the profit centers to optimize their production and hence reduce their cost of production and increase their profitability. Thus, I can establish the value that I, as IT or HR or finance, provide to these profit centers. Based on that value, I can establish cost metrics to attach to that value. So, for example, if you have operations, you're a warehouse, a distributor, and within your warehouse, you have wireless access points that enable your pickers to pull orders from the database. And based on those pulled orders, they could go out there and pick the merchandise and stage it for shipping. The value that wireless network, the value that database system provides to you as a company could be established in a very simple manner. How much would it cost me to pull all these orders if I did not have this technology? Versus how much does it cost me to pull all these orders with this technology? That is a value. You then correlate that value to the technology deployed and break it down to an elemental level, and that is what you charge operations for each gigabit of bandwidth used, for each megabit of data storage used, for each megahertz of CPU utilized. As the operations part of the organization utilizes those resources, you bill them. That billing then becomes the revenue for IT. And that revenue is matched against the budgeted expenditure to establish a profitability estimate for the IT department. How could a national economy deploy chargebacks? Let's go to California. Caltrans builds 100 miles of freeway in Los Angeles. It costs Caltrans $1 billion to build that freeway. How can they recoup that investment? Every time a person in LA goes to register their vehicle, they get a decal. They attach that to their windshield. Every time you get an alarm in the 210 freeway, a hill, and you ride down all the way to Sierra Bonita or Sierra Madre, it charges you. It captures the information as soon as you get on the freeway, and then when you get off the freeway, it captures the information. So it charges you for those miles you have driven. At the end of the month, the government sends you a bill. You could pay that bill monthly, or when you go to re-register your vehicle or renew your driver's license, you could pay the accumulated sum. If you don't do it, you don't get your license. If you don't do it, you don't renew your registration. In that manner, that $1 billion that Caltrans invested in that freeway is recouped over time. In that manner, the cost for maintaining that freeway is funded by the people who use that freeway. There are many other areas in which the government could implement chargebacks, whether it's providing park services, whether it's providing public utilities, whether it's providing police services, whether it's providing fire services. The focus is the government should become a profit center. It provides these services to the citizens for the benefit of the citizens and recoups that cost through chargebacks. This eliminates the need for income taxation. Corporations utilize the facilities the government sets forth. The power grid. When Obama said, "You did not build that," what he meant is you might be Walmart transporting your goods over a public road that you did not build. If that road did not exist, you, Walmart, would not be able to supply your outlets from your distribution centers. You did not build that port through which your goods are imported from China. You did not build that power grid that powers your office buildings. You did not build that telephone system, that internet system. Therefore, corporations should pay taxation on their revenue because they're utilizing facilities that belong to the citizens of the nation in order to generate a profit. I propose a very simple taxation scheme. Since we're getting rid of the IRS, there are no tax refunds, nothing. A very simple taxation scheme. For corporations earning less than $1 million a year, zero taxes. Corporations earning between $1 and $10 million a year pay 5% taxes. Corporations earning between $10 and $50 million a year pay 10% taxes. Between $50 and $250 million a year, 15% taxes. $250 million to $1 billion a year in revenue, 20% taxes. Anything over $1 billion a year in revenue, 25% taxes. No depreciation, no deductions for interest expense, no amortization. You pay that tax, it's a flat tax. Another additional source of revenue, sales taxes. Sales taxes, you decompose it into two components, state and municipal and federal. Hence, you're taxing consumption. By taxing consumption, you encourage savings. Now, the profits that the nation generates on an annual basis, those profits then go back to the citizens. So the difference between a nonprofit and a for-profit corporation is simply this. A for-profit corporation pays the profits back to the shareholders in terms of capital gains and in terms of dividends. A nonprofit corporation does not pay out to the shareholders. Instead, all the money that a nonprofit makes goes back into the nonprofit. It is all retained earnings. In a similar manner, if you structure national economies as nonprofit entities, then all the profits that nation makes go back into the nation in terms of investments. So if the U.S. made $1 trillion in profit for the year 2019, then the U.S. might take $200 billion and pay back to its citizens. $100 a citizen, $200 a citizen, whatever they determine. The remaining $800 billion would then be reinvested in the nation, whether it be in additional research and development, whether it be in additional infrastructure, whatever the planners, the economic planners of that nation see as the most fitting long-term strategic investment. Now, you also have to take the power of the purse away from elected officials. Elected officials will try and steer government funds to their district in order to ensure their reelection. I propose setting up a separate economic board. This economic board would be responsible for establishing the long-term 5-year, 10-year, 15-year, 20-year strategic growth objectives of the nation. Based on those outlines, it would then break it down to 1-year budgets, 2-year budgets, 3-year budgets. Provide those budgets to the Congress, and the Congress would then allocate funds within the confines of those budgets. It cannot exceed those budgets. If the Economic Advisory Board said the Department of Defense should get $200 billion, Congress cannot allocate more than $200 billion to Department of Defense. Now, if they decide $100 billion will go to weapons systems and $50 billion will go to military preparedness, that's their choice. If the Economic Advisory Board recommends $100 billion to the Department of Education, that's it. So the Economic Advisory Board would then put a restraint on Congress. Because remember, the objective is to not incur any debt. Let's move on. We've addressed income taxation, we've addressed budgeting and strategic objectives, and revenue streams. Adam Smith, in his book Wealth of Nations, and that book is this thick, and I read all of it, and I had a headache for 10,000 years after reading that motherfucking book. I had a 10,000 year headache. But read it. You'll understand current economic theory. He mentions competitive advantage. He proposes that a nation should only produce those goods at which it is better at than any other nation. I see a flaw in that. If I'm a nation and I have my citizens and they need to drive around in cars, and I decide I'm not very good at manufacturing cars, so I'll import cars. Guess what that does? It makes me dependent on those nations from whom I import cars. Crude oil is a perfect example. Everyone needs crude oil, or do they? What everyone needs is energy. If I'm a nation, I do not produce crude oil, I'm dependent on the crude market. If the price goes up, it's going to fuck up my economy. If the price goes down, it's going to make my economy do good. Why not find methods to alleviate my energy dependence? Methods that I could source locally, whether it's bioenergy. If I'm a nation like Kenya or Uganda, Sudan, Ethiopia, that's right there close to the equator. You have 12 hours of sunlight each day, every day of the year. Build buildings, put solar panels in the buildings. Bring about solar batteries. During the day, capture that solar energy. The temperature around the equator is not too hot, it's not too cold. You likely don't need a lot of air conditioning. So during the day, all that solar energy you capture, you store it. Then at night, distribute it. This could easily reduce your dependence on crude oil by 30 to 40%. So a nation should strive to be self-sufficient. Identify those goods that are critical to your success, to the success of your citizens, and produce those goods. Those goods that are not that important, you can import. Those goods that you produce in excess, you export. In either case, a nation should never have a net negative trade account. Never. Because that makes you dependent on other nations. When Hitler invaded Russia, the reason Hitler failed is because Hitler ran out of oil. And he could not power his tanks, he could not power his troop transport vehicles because he ran out of oil. The reason the Japanese failed in World War II is because they were cut off from crude oil supplies. Had Japan, had Germany, had their own internal energy production facilities, Japan and Germany would have won World War II. No question. No question whatsoever. So a nation should strive to be self-sufficient. A nation should avoid national debt at all costs. National debt simply cripples you. Were it not for the petrodollar, the U.S., with its $22 trillion in debt, would now be a banana republic. Why? Because interest on treasury bonds would be at least 15 to 20%. The dollar would be worthless. Inflation would be at least 15 to 20%. There is no way you as an American would be able to enjoy the life that you live today were it not for the petrodollar. So a nation should avoid debt. Now, you structure a national economy in this manner. You make it a for-profit enterprise, a for-profit ecosystem. What happens? Now, the nation can provide free college education. Now, the U.S. can provide money to the states to provide free college education at state schools. What does that do in the long run? The more kids that could go to college means the higher skilled your workforce. A higher skilled workforce results in more productive corporations. More productive corporations result in more sales. More sales means increased revenue. Increased revenue means increased tax revenue from corporate taxation. hence a nation benefits. The more educated your population as a nation, the more successful you are. Number two, healthcare. With this model of profitability, the nation can now invest in healthcare, not just healthcare provision, but healthcare research and scientific research. At a lot of universities around the nation, at the graduate level, the professors will apply for grants from corporations or from the government. These are research grants. Department of Agriculture might decide we want to do research on a new type of pesticide. So they will put out an announcement. Now, professors will put out proposals. This is how I intend to conduct this research, and these are the results I intend to obtain, and this is how much it will cost me. Department of Agriculture will then award that professor that grant, and that professor will then hire some graduate assistants who will perform that research. If that research is successful, what happens too often is that the Department of Agriculture will not profit from the results of that research. In my proposal, I'm the Department of Agriculture. I spend $1 billion in research. 10 products are produced. I own those products. If Monsanto wants to use the outcome of that research, they could license the outcome from me. Then every dollar that Monsanto makes from that research, I get 10 cents. So if they create a new pesticide, every dollar that pesticide they sell, I make 10 cents. If they sell $50 billion worth of that pesticide, I make $5 billion. With all of the research that the government funds, if they utilize this model, that research pays back. And hence, the research that is funded becomes a profit center. Governments do not need to be broke. Governments do not need to borrow money. Thus, we've established the profitable national economy. And this could be extended to state economies. This could be extended to municipal economies at the county level, at the city level. We move away from bond issuance. We move away from debt. And the nation now starts to benefit the citizens. Corporations now have advanced infrastructure on which to operate. Citizens, consumers, they now have a nation that works for their benefit. I've discussed this in relevance in the perspective of the U.S. economy. This can easily be applied to third world economies, to second world economies. You could take a nation, Mozambique. They structure themselves in this fashion. Given that they don't have the development that the U.S. has, they would have to sink a lot of capital investing into that nation. So at the onset, they might incur debt. But that is productive debt. Because if they do this in this manner, if they borrow $1 billion to build their infrastructure, to build their roads, to build their power grid, their communication systems, and they recoup money from that investment, they could pay that $1 billion off within 5 years. And within that 5 years, the economy is now vibrant and they're no longer dependent on external financing. There are a lot of details to be established around this subject. As I mentioned, I am putting forth a website. I've been lazy, forgive me, I'm going to get it done. Next Saturday, that is my target, 1 week from now. And this website will go into depth of how to specifically implement this national economic model. At the end of the day, there is no reason that human beings should live the life they currently live. Because currently, if you look at the chronological progression of a human being, you're born into this world. You spend 12 or 16 or 18 or 20 years memorizing shit. That's what school is. They teach you shit. They don't teach you shit. They give you shit to memorize. A lot of you do not understand what you learn. You just memorize it. Why? Because when you take a test, it's going to test how good you are at memorizing things, not how well you understand things. The better you can memorize, the better you do in the tests. You do well on your tests, you get a good GPA out of high school. You go to a good college. You do the same thing, memorize shit. You get a good GPA out of college. You either go to grad school, medical school, law school, or get a job, dependent on your GPA, which is based on how good you were at memorizing shit. You are not really learning anything. You are memorizing things. After you're done memorizing, you graduate, you get a good job. You marry your sweetheart. You pop out a few babies. She pops out a few babies. If you're a man, if you're a woman, you pop out a few babies. You raise those babies. They go through the same process of memorizing shit. You work 30, 40 years at a company. You retire. Collect Social Security. Go on Medicare. Get your little pension. Live another 10, 15 years. You die. And everyone forgets about you. We have brains. We have brains. We have cognitive ability, the ability to think, the ability to reason, the ability to discover, the ability to invent. Working in an office 20, 30 years, generating financial statements, is not utilizing that ability. Working in an office 20, 30 years, managing people, is not utilizing that ability. Corporate America is where Americans go to die. And the first death is your brain. Your brain dies. Then you die. Human beings were designed to innovate. Yes, we're animals, but we're different. We are a step above the animals in the wild. Human beings were not designed to conform. Fuck the status quo. That's what every human being should say. Because the status quo means you don't think for yourself. Someone else thinks for you. Everyone's wearing skinny jeans. Let me wear skinny jeans. Everyone has red contacts. Let me get red contacts. Why? So by designing a nation in this manner, you now create that capability for humanity to advance to the next level of existence. The nation is no longer a burden on the citizens. The nation is now a motivator that pushes the citizens to greater heights. As the citizens attain greater heights, the nation rises. You now have a nation that continually grows. You now have a nation that is not bound to boom and bust cycles. Your currency. You now attach your currency to the GDP. If the GDP increases, you increase the money supply. So at the end of every quarter, the Secretary of the Treasury could take a look at the GDP. It increased by 5%. So let us increase the money supply by 5%. That kind of nation is based on a solid foundation. That kind of nation is self-sufficient. That kind of nation is not dependent on externalities. That kind of nation is an independent nation. And an independent nation can greatly contribute to the growth of other nations and the prosperity of the world. In the next videos, I will now talk about the actual, based on this discussion, I will now talk about how to start developing economies in Africa, in the Caribbean, and how to develop a black economy within the U.S. that will contribute to the greater national economy as well as ensure the success and prosperity of black people within this nation. And finally, how to link all of these, the black economy within the U.S., the black economy within Latin America, the black Caribbean economies, and the black African economies, how to link them all together to bring about the prosperity and success of black people on this planet. Once upon a time, we, black people, ran this world. We've been through some shit, physical and mental. Right now, we're asleep. But when that giant is awoken, fuck, nigga, we will run this motherfucker. So, thank you for tuning in tonight. God bless, and good night.